Opposition MPs and anti-nuclear protesters are asking for explanations after the emergency in Wiltshire surrounding a crashed lorry believed to have nuclear weapons on board. Labour's defence spokesman, Mr Martin O'Neill, said there was considerable public disquiet. The 20-ton lorry bound for the Dean Hill Arms Depot near Salisbury has now been towed to the depot after an all-night security operation.
The alert began as troops and civil police moved in to seal off a large area of farmland east of Salisbury. At the centre of the security cordon, two 20-ton mammoth weapons transporters. One had skidded off the narrow icy road and rolled onto its side. Also on the scene, a group of anti-nuclear protesters who'd slipped through the cordon.
At the moment, there are people working on the mammoth majors in low light, so they're obviously trying to right the vehicles, get them back on the road. One has already moved off.
How far did the soldiers let you...
We got within about 50 metres. We told that if we advanced any further, they'd shoot us. They were carrying live ammunition. They say we know more than they do at the present moment. They admit that they are guarding a dangerous missile convoy.
All I can tell you is that a military transport vehicle suffered an accident this afternoon, and we are now endeavouring to put it right.
Were people in this area at risk at any time from this accident?
I can tell you that there were no casualties.
The recovery work continued through the night. By dawn, a huge crane had moved into position above the transporter. In sub-zero conditions, the defensive circle of troops widened as other soldiers burrowed beneath the vehicle so that lifting gear could be attached. Finally, with armed troops still in evidence and 17 hours after the accident, the lifting operation began. As the transporter came upright, the full extent of the damage could be seen, and it was almost an hour before the convoy could resume its journey. Still heavily guarded, the damaged vehicle crawled past the protesters who'd mounted a night-long vigil. Finally, the half-mile column moved into the Dean Hill Arms Depot. The emergency was over, but two questions remain. Was the transporter carrying nuclear depth charges, as has been suggested? And, faced with last night's icy conditions, should the convoy have moved at all? Robert Hall, ITN, Salisbury.
The government has refused to confirm whether nuclear weapons were being carried by a secret military convoy involved in an accident on a country road yesterday. It happened near the Dean Hill Naval Arms Depot at West Dean near Salisbury. It took 18 hours to get the convoy back on the road. Anti-nuclear groups say it was on its way from Portsmouth docks to a nuclear weapons establishment near Reading. One of Labour's defence spokesman, Martin O'Neill, said if nuclear material was involved, it would be one of the most serious such accidents ever made public. But Junior Defence Minister Roger Freeman said there had been no risk to local people. The armed forces had an excellent record in transporting nuclear weapons safely.
The Ministry of Defence won't confirm that the convoy was carrying nuclear materials, but the type of vehicle which overturned is usually used only for nuclear warheads. It was part of an elaborate convoy including civilian police, a mobile control centre, a fire tender and several troop-carrying vehicles. The troops immediately cordoned off the area when the first of the lorries skidded off the road and overturned just 2 miles from its destination. A second lorry slewed across the road on the ice. They were heading for the Royal Navy Armaments Depot at Dean Hill, where it's thought it was due to spend the night before going on to the Royal Ordnance Nuclear Warhead Factory at Burfield near Reading.
It's the government policy not to discuss the movement, the use or indeed the storage of nuclear weapons.
Is there any risk to people around here from what is being carried?
If there was any risk of any sort, I don't think you'd find our rescue team now trying to put it back on the road, or indeed myself going backwards and forwards and dealing with the media in such a free way.
Local police closed the road overnight while dozens of troops remained guarding the convoy through the night as temperatures dropped to nearly -10 Celsius. The recovery operation got underway at first light after a tent was erected at the rear of the vehicle while checks were carried out. Members of anti-nuclear groups who had tracked the convoy said their main fear had been of a fire starting which could set off the conventional explosive charges contained in the warhead. The risk of nuclear explosion, they said, is negligible, but there would be a high risk of serious radiation leaks.
The MOD has categorically stated before now that this accident could never happen. That is why they take various precautions like stop over before it gets dark, rest their drivers and drive with quite large gaps between the vehicles and this sort of thing. It's because they have always claimed that this kind of accident couldn't happen. Well, this accident has happened.
Checks with Geiger counters immediately after the crash site was cleared revealed no trace of radiation.
The Royal Naval Armament Depot at West Dean is one of the biggest ammunition dumps in the south of England. It's widely believed that the weapons stored in the honeycomb of tunnels in the hillside include warheads for nuclear depth charges carried by warships operating from Portsmouth Harbour. Like all nuclear weapons, the depth charge warheads need regular maintenance. When they're taken out, the warheads are carried in special convoys escorted by heavily armed Royal Marine commandos. The Defence Ministry won't discuss these convoys, but they're regularly tracked by members of anti-nuclear groups. As well as police outriders, each convoy includes a fire engine and an incident control vehicle. The trucks are protected against road accidents. The chance of an accidental nuclear explosion is reckoned to be non-existent. The biggest hazard is fire, which could cause a radiation leak. The other potential danger is a terrorist attack, which is why there's always a strong military escort. The Defence Ministry's use of convoys rather than railways has already been criticised. In particular, critics will now want to know why nuclear weapons were being moved along icy roads and why it took 18 hours to get them safely back into a military base.
Well, opposition MPs are calling for a full inquiry into an accident in Wiltshire in which a military lorry overturned. The Ministry of Defence has refused to give any details about the convoy or its payload, but anti-nuclear campaigners say that it must have been carrying nuclear weapons. They say the heavy lorries are seen frequently on Wiltshire's narrow country roads.
The military convoy came to a halt on Saturday afternoon as it neared the border between Wiltshire and Hampshire. The Ministry of Defence has refused to confirm if it was carrying nuclear weapons. But as night fell, a rescue operation was mounted and armed men formed a defensive ring around the site. A Wiltshire student who belongs to an anti-nuclear group was at the scene.
We got within about 50 metres. We told that if we advanced any further, they'd shoot us. They were carrying live ammunition. They say we know more than they do at the present moment. They admit that they are guarding a dangerous missile convoy.
Today, Sarah Graham was back in Devizes with other anti-nuclear campaigners. They say 2 nuclear convoys pass through Wiltshire each month. They claim some have travelled along this road in Devizes. Another convoy is expected to be on the move tonight.
We expect the cruise convoy, which is presently in Blackpool Firs and Salisbury Plain, to return to Greenham tonight. It could come through Devizes and Marlborough, though it's more likely that it shall go through Amesbury and Andover on its way back to Greenham Common.
There's little doubt that Saturday's convoy was carrying nuclear material, but no one was hurt and no one evacuated from their homes. So weren't the safeguards working?
The Ministry of Defence took vehicles carrying nuclear material along an icy road. They have been totally irresponsible, in my view. We were lucky. If the conventional explosive in those warheads had gone off, or if there had been a fire, radioactive plutonium would have been spread over a very large area. We're dealing not with just our own lives, but with the lives of generations of people to come.
Protests against cruise missile convoys are frequent, even though the government say no live warheads are ever carried on our roads. Trainloads of nuclear waste are also regularly carried through the West. They're also the subject of anti-nuclear demonstrations. Firemen have carried out training exercises on mock nuclear accidents, but anti-nuclear groups claim the brigade isn't always told about the military convoys. Tonight, Labour MPs have called for an inquiry and a government statement on Saturday's accident. It's also likely to come up in tomorrow's Commons debate on the Army.